Welcome to the art and science of difficult conversations, where we believe when you communicate better, you live better. On today's episode, we're going to talk through how do you talk about respect and communication differences across generations, across the workforce. As always, I'm one of your co-hosts. I'm Chris. I'm the owner of Leadership Potential, where I work with new mission-driven and nonprofit leaders to navigate difficult transitions.
And I'm Lucie, owner of MindFittery, mental fitness gym for leaders, their teams, and families.
And today we're doing something different. Lucie and I, usually we either just have a conversation or we interview other people. Today, because of this topic, and this is something that Lucie's both dealt with herself, I think we've all dealt with this, but also she's coached a lot of leaders through it. I'm going to interview Lucie about the best practices and how to manage differences across generations. Lucie, are you ready for this?
Let's do it.
Yeah. So first of all, tell the listeners what's going on in terms of what are you noticing in terms of this idea of respect and the communication across generations?
So I believe I might be even more sensitive than others because of my bilingual background and multicultural background. So it's not just across generations conversations, but also across cultures and the cultural differences. And I've been recently dealing with some clients, European clients from my own culture, and we have different ways of addressing people. We have the polite, the formal way, and then the informal way that's more casual, let's say. And with some clients, at the beginning, I asked them when I started working with them how they would like to be addressed. Didn't specifically ask about which version of addressing. I assumed it would be the formal one. Then later I found out, because I haven't been in that culture and working for many years, I found out that some actually prefer the informal way in coaching because they feel they can open up a little bit more. And that's where I really started thinking about it more. How do I address this? I use the formal, informal way. And it's not just in different language. It's the new generation maybe could be a little bit more less formal, where I hear the older generation saying, well, they are just disrespectful. And how do we navigate these situations so people can get line? There is a safety in that conversation. There's more understanding rather than judging each other.
Yeah, it's interesting you've noticed this, because I've noticed this for a long time also, right? Like, because we have like 5 generations across the workforce now, and certainly people who have been in the workforce longer, there's the way they approach the work, the way they think people should be talking to one another or talking to people in higher positions of power. There's certainly that hierarchical viewpoint.
Yes.
Right. And so if in your work and what you've seen, what impact have you seen in terms of how it affects the relationships or how it affects somebody's perceived by others?
You know, an example comes to mind when a client just recently shared, she just got shifted into a new role in a company. And now somebody that was not her supervisor previously, and he had let's say in the hierarchy, higher position, but because he was not her direct supervisor and he is very warm personality, kind of wants to be casual with everybody, he was casual with her, so they had kind of a close relationship. Now, since her role shifted, she came to a session, I feel really awkward. Now I don't know how to address him. She is also from a different culture. She's from Asian culture, living in the US now, and she's in her early 20s. So she's like, how do I navigate the hierarchy? He wants me to be casual, but I don't feel comfortable. I just freeze sometimes.
Yep.
And so really noticing, my advice would be really looking at both what's comfortable for us and also what's comfortable and appropriate for the other person. In this particular case, that leader, that supervisor, he appreciated where people are kind of casual and friendly with each other. So if she started addressing him with more distance, that could possibly work against the collaboration. Yeah. So that kind of pausing and reflecting on what is the type of relationship, what is comfortable for us, and what does the other person prefer.
Yeah. But that takes a lot of insight though, right? Like, because even if I haven't had this conversation before, I wouldn't necessarily know that difference, right? Like, I think a lot of people, this is the thing that annoys me, is people think of DEI trainings or cultural communication trainings as like, let's talk to people of other cultures better. And they forget that everybody has their own culture and like
True.
your own viewpoint of how you approach the work. And that's not the same as everybody else. Like I coached a guy who was a manager who was older than me, I think in his 50s or something. And he was trying to give his subordinate an order, something to do. And the very fact that she even said, no, I can't because I'm too busy, like made him so angry or annoyed. He wasn't necessarily angry, but he was just like really annoyed because like he was like, I would never say no to a boss of mine. Like, what's going on here?
Makes sense. That actually reminds me, that another client, she said, she was new in the company. She wanted to ask questions to understand, to make sure that she's aligned. And she got asked to do something and she wanted to ask more questions about it. And is this the right thing to do? Because I'm also seeing the other thing. And her new manager said, in this company, when your manager tells you to do something, you need to do something. You don't ask questions. You don't question it. That's the way he was trained, let's say.
Right. That's those informal values of a company, right? Those unwritten rules.
Yep.
So then for you, I guess, how do you help leaders, or what advice would you give to leaders to start building that self-awareness of those rules or those unwritten rules of how I view the world and how I think interactions and relationships should be?
I would say if they, at the beginning if they have somebody new in the company, they hire somebody, to have a conversation. What kind of communication works? How do they want to be addressed? Do they like to have check-ins over email or just longer one-on-ones? What form of communication? How frequent communication? And having an agreement about that rather than assuming this is how the other person likes to communicate or be addressed, just asking. And I would say that can create that safety and that alignment rather than assuming or not even asking and just saying, okay, this is how we do things here.
What would you say if they have that conversation, they're open right from the beginning? I got a new employee. I'm talking to my employee. I'm having this and I want them to do something a certain way and they just disagree wholeheartedly. Right. And it's not a specific policy or a procedure in the manual. So it's not like I can write them up for this. It's just I have a preference of like, I want you to call me Mr. Chris or whatever. Right. Let's say whatever.
Mr. Chris.
But you're like, no, I always like preferring to call my boss bro. Right. How do you navigate that or how do you manage that? Because it's not like something you can say there's a policy. You have to do it this way. It's just my personal preference.
That's a good one. That's a good question. So let's say, so the leader is Chris, right? And the new employee says, I just want to call everybody bro.
Yeah.
Okay. So, of course, my approach might be different from different leaders. Depends on the personality. Sure. Me as a coach, I'm usually asking questions, really wanting to understand first. So my approach would be, what does it provide for you when you call somebody bro? What does it give you? I want to feel equal to everybody. I want to feel everybody's fair and bringing it to the company culture. Here, everybody's fair. We want to respect everybody. And for other people, that might not be something that makes them feel respected or fairness. And having basically a conversation with the person and saying, how can they see also my perspective and finding a way how we can align. I really want to ask you also, because you have a different style. So yeah, I think that would benefit the listeners to also hear your approach.
I would say in that case, I always ask the leader, but I won't say this word, but I'll just ask them kind of why is it so important that they're called this or why they have to follow this process. And essentially, I just want to understand also, like for the leader, what is so important about this specific process or the way they're doing it. And the question then eventually comes down to, do you want to be right or do you want to be successful? Like, is this really going to impact the work that's being done? If it's, you can keep an eye on it and you can collaborate with them. And, to your point, it's the same idea. Just let's collaborate and see, like, maybe I can be satisfied with you not calling me mister, but you can't call me bro.
Yeah. Finding some alternative.
Can we find an alternative here? Yes. I don't want to be called bro.
Yep.
I'm not your bro. I'm your boss here, right? I'm not your friend. It's just the way it is, right? So maybe try to figure out another way and also figure out, is it really that important that you're called this? I work with a leader that was facing a lot of pushback, and she wanted to bring her job description to a staff meeting, say, look through all the things I have to do and manage. And I said, essentially, number one, I said, that's not going to work. That's like one of the few times I've ever been like explicitly direct of like, don't do this. That won't work. But also, it's like, do you want to be right or do you want to be successful? Like, if the goal is to get them to do this thing or other thing, how is this really going to help them do this other thing you want them to do? And so, just
Makes
thinking through, like,
sense.
how important is being called Mr. or whatever title
I love
to you?
that. Yeah. That's a great way of putting it. Do you want to be right or do you want to be successful? I often use do you want to be right or do you want to be happy? In this case, successful is more relevant. Also, really, what really matters the most here? And picking our battles in a way too.
Yeah. What else do you, in terms of your practice or how you work with other leaders to think about this stuff, how do you help them, or do you help them reframe what respect even is? Because I think even across cultures and even in the same country, different regions will look at
Absolutely.
respect differently and how it's perceived. So do you help them reframe that, or how do you help them think about respect?
We usually start with what does respect mean to you personally? Let's say if they say, I want to be respected, what does it look like? What kind of behavior tells you that you are being respected or disrespected? And then looking at what would be a way to communicate that to other people. What would be a way to give feedback? Let's say SBI feedback, situation, behavior, impact. This is what I observe. This is the situation in this meeting. I am noticing you keep interrupting me in the middle of the sentence. The way I perceive it, it makes me feel upset and disrespected. And in the future, I would prefer if you let me finish first. And then if you have any questions, you can share them after I finish my sentence. How does that sound to you? What's coming up for you? Something like that.
Yeah, I love the approach. Again, I think what we bond over is the idea of let's create a more collaborative conversation as opposed to you just need to do it this way.
Yeah.
Especially around something that's not like an explicit policy. You have to do it this way, right? It's unless you are like the military or another kind of culture where it's like specifically you have to do it the specific way for a reason. Then yeah, you can lean back on that. But outside of that, it's collaboration and conversation.
Exactly. And a lot of the times people, maybe they didn't mean to disrespect them. Maybe they keep interrupting the person because they have lots of ideas in their head and they're worried that they're going to forget what they're saying if they don't say it right away. But unless we have a conversation, what's going on for you in that moment and sharing the impact that it has on us and being open to exploring how both of us can get what we need. If we don't have the open conversation, it's hard to find a win-win situation in a way.
And so then let me ask you about the other side. You know, we were talking about like managers managing their teams. What about the younger generation that's coming into the workforce? And I'm not as worried about the people who are willing to have the conversation because you know they could probably do it better anyway. But I'm thinking about the people who are maybe more tentative, like I don't want to rock the boat, I don't want to push back, but it feels disrespectful for me not to say anything. How can they bring things up to, you know, their boss, the boss's boss, you know, and all the way up to, you know, when they're younger, they're newer to the workforce or the company? How would you recommend them start to bring up and open this conversation?
Great question. And it can be a tricky situation for somebody that's new in the company and they don't have many supportive relationships within the company. Sometimes if you've been with the company for longer, you have good supportive relationships, you can always ask somebody else how would you address the situation that you trust. I had a client that her boss, she's new with the company, and her boss often, when she brought up some ideas, he, in her words, shut her down, interrupted her, or even screamed. And she shared, that's how she started coaching actually, because she felt really stressed and she was wondering, should I even stay here with the company? And what do I do? Maybe that's how, because that was also her first job, official job. And so is this how this works in this company, in the workplace? Is this normal? So just for her, it was, no, this is not a professional behavior where a boss screams at you. Definitely not appropriate. And the advice was, you know, first, some companies have amazing HR departments. In this situation, for her to give feedback to a boss, she did change her communication style a little bit so he can hear her a little bit. She became more assertive, yet still the screaming continued. And so after her conversation with him was not really successful, plus she was extremely getting stressed out about any meeting with him. What happened after the boss went for leave, and his boss, her skip manager, basically had a conversation with her. She took her 2 weeks to get their confidence to mention it a little bit and ask for advice.
Mm.
Eventually what happened, they moved her to a different team with a new manager. And that manager is no longer a manager right now.
Okay.
And so this was the situation that it was resolved. So for anybody who has, sometimes people even don't know, or they are questioning, is this normal? Maybe I shouldn't rock the boat because I'm worried that if I say something, I'm gonna lose the job. I cannot lose the job, so maybe I cannot complain. If there's somebody that you trust, if you have a mentor, some companies they have like a mentorship relationships. If there's somebody that you trust, have a conversation with them. What would they advise you? Because sometimes these situations are very tricky. HR departments, if it's a situation then the boss screams at them, let's say, have a conversation with the HR, because sometimes things needs to be reported, put in writing, and escalated through the other channels. I want to know also your perspective on that, because this could be a quite sensitive and tricky topic.
I don't know if I have much to add. I feel like a lot of the things you say are correct. I think going to HR if possible. I would say I always also recommend starting at your direct, whoever the person is first, and then navigating that conversation, which you can learn in my course about how to manage difficult conversations. But I talk through that, right? Like there's a way to facilitate the dialogue where you're respecting them if that's important to them, but also you're putting yourself on an equal footing, because the way you phrase the words and how you ask permission or set boundaries can put you on an equal level. So I would say start with that person, your manager, and then if that doesn't work, then you should start moving up the chain of command. If it doesn't work for your manager, go to HR or go to your manager's manager. Like that's like a choose your own adventure, whichever one makes more sense to you. Go to go to a mentor if you have a mentor. If not, go talk to somebody on your team, right? If there's somebody on your team that's been there longer and can give you more insight into what's happening or why this manager is acting this way. Having that, it's okay to escalate and keep talking about it, and because it's not going to get better by itself. No. It's just going to continue or get worse, right? At best, you could just hope that it continues at that level and doesn't like escalate. Yeah. But if it's really feeling disrespectful, it's worth it to bring it up.
Absolutely.
Now, I would say, when you bring it up, it's also, do you want to vent and be right, or do you want to be successful? So it's really about how do you manage your own emotions. It's not about going and just yelling at somebody, because that's not going to change anybody's behavior. As far as I know, that doesn't really work. It's really about how do you facilitate a good dialogue where your needs are met. And so that means if you got to vent to somebody else, go vent to somebody else. Yell with your partner, yell with your spouse, a friend, complain all you want about that, swear about your boss or whatever. But into them directly should not be a confrontational, angry approach, because that's not going to change somebody's mind.
That's a good point. And also not coming from the blaming perspective, really looking at and describing as objectively as possible.
Exactly. So then, Lucie, what are 1 to 2 big takeaways you have for if somebody's listening, what are the 1 to 2 big takeaways you have for them to think about?
I would say don't make assumptions, because I've said in some other episode, assumptions are termites of the relationships, personal as well as professional. Ask and have courage and curiosity to ask, even when uncomfortable. And be open to listen what works for the other person and open to finding the solution together. Yeah. That feels good to everyone.
And I'll add for the listeners, I think something you said at the beginning is taking the time to pause and self-reflect first. I think that was an important point to bring up, the idea of just reflecting on what's going on for you. Why is it important for you? Why is this thing rubbing you in the wrong way? And that's the beginning of understanding, I didn't realize I had this expectation of interactions or relationships, but now I know this for sure. And so now I need to figure out is it just me personally, or is it something that's actually important to the work that we're doing here or the culture that I'm trying to build? Maybe it is, right? We're not here to tell you what's right or wrong for your culture. It's really about you have to get clarity on that. So that's that was a great point at the beginning. As we close today, as we, think about the next steps, if you're thinking about this, how do you get better at this? How do you navigate this relationship? There's a few ways we can help you. Just remember that you can reach out to Lucie, visit her website at mindfittery.com, and her information is below, and she helps you navigate these kind of things. That's her big thing, is thinking about how to be more emotionally intelligent and navigate these difficult relationships and situations. You can always reach out to me, myleadershippotential.com. You can follow me there, learn more about me. And again, I have a course that will help you navigate and facilitate these conversations and get the results you want. But keep listening to us. Give us a like, give us a share. Let us know in the comments below what you think. What other things are we missing, or what else are we overlooking? And we'll see you next week. And join us next week for our next episode. We'll see you next week.
See you next week.
Thanks, Lucie.
Thanks, Chris.